The year is 2004. 24-year-old Macaulay Culkin's mugshot makes headlines around the world. He's charged with possessing marijuana. In 2007, we witnessed the superstar Britney Spears' mental breakdown. Fast forward to 2008, the singer is hospitalized and placed under her father's conservatorship due to mental illness. In 2014, the Oscar-winning actress Catherine Zeta-Jones proactively checked into a health care facility. Daily headlines around the world are blasted with celebrity mental illness or breakdowns. With all this press, the question must be asked: does the upper class struggle with the highest number of mental health issues? Or do we just think they do because they're blasted in the headlines? What about the other classes? Does each class in our society equally carry the weight of mental illness? And what about crime? And is there a link between mental illness and crime? In this episode, we'll be taking a deeper look into the amazing way mental health forms and is handled in different classes in society. Be sure to like and subscribe. It lets me know that you find valuable the content I'm making for you, and it also helps other people to find it. I know you've heard the lower class, the working class, and the upper class, but there are actually so many levels and even so many layers when it comes to social class. And have you ever met those people who tell you which class they belong to? Yes, I have too, and some feel very strongly about which class they identify with. But on the other hand, other people don't even know which class category they fall in, or they don't even care. And sure, social class may seem like an old idea, but social class is still very prominent to this day. In recent years, a very influential idea about class has emerged. There was this study by a sociologist named Pierre Bourdieu. And along with some other super smart people, Pierre investigated the different classes. He found that class was and is not only a big deal, but that class isn't about just economic resources. Class is also about other types of resources, meaning that classes can vary in terms beyond monetary means. Class can be about social connections, or rather, who you know. Classes vary in terms of cultural knowledge as well, what you know as far as history, culture, and education. This cultural knowledge, as we call it, can influence whether people have certain behaviors. These behaviors can be normal, deviant, or could lead to mental health problems. And yes, class play a huge role in whether people have mental health problems, how severe they are, and ultimately if they go treated or untreated. But before we dive into mental health, let's first talk about class and how class is treated by society and in the media. I'm going to challenge you now to consider another name for a class I'm sure you're familiar with. Have you ever heard of the dangerous class? And no, I'm not talking about the top 1% or even those under the poverty line. The dangerous class refers to the working class. And I know what you might be thinking, but hear me out for a second. The working class is what keeps the world moving. They keep businesses and schools open. They climb up the power lines to make sure you have electricity to microwave your meal and charge your phone. They maintain the roads you drive on. They make sure the sewage system works so you can just flush your toilet. They basically keep the current economy moving forward. But hear me out now and let me give you an example of why this class can be perceived as dangerous and why. Back in August 2011, in the UK headlines were the words "Job rule," "Anarchy in the UK," and "London is burning." Now, this was not a movie, this really happened. And they were called the English Riots. They were not just your run-of-the-mill riots. These riots caused somewhere between $200 and $300 million in damage. So yeah, the media attention the riots received was crazy. But notice how the headlines didn't say any one name or even a list of names. No Jim, Bob, George here. The working class worked together to cause the riots and ultimately the millions in damage. But no one knew who the people were. Why? Because no one really knows who the working class is. They are nameless, but they are a mighty group of people because they are such a huge class. There were no names because these people were not famous, but surely they were important for the amount of damage they caused. Now jump from this dangerous working class to the upper class. And while the media tends to report mainstream crimes such as these riots, what about corporate crimes? Notice how the media doesn't report these crimes as crimes. They use almost marketing-type wording such as scandals, leaks, or even accidents. And once again, no one person is listed in the headlines or even the reports, because there have been so many scandals with large institutions and banks that it's easier to say, well, it's just the banks. We all know they're crooked. Take for example what happened across the US and the UK in the 2008 crash. Although the fallout from corrupt banks and leaders caused the world to come crashing down, there was almost no criminal justice that followed. Since 2007 we've seen money laundering, tax evasion, we've had sanctions busting in terms of dealing with Iran, we've had the fixing of the foreign exchange rate, and so much more. So as a society, how do we determine what is bad, what is acceptable, and what is pinned on an individual versus a corporation? Professor Steve Toms, who's head of social policy and criminology at the Open University, puts it like this. But of course, what's very interesting is that the words attached to these violations of laws by companies and sometimes by states, the words that are used almost always evade reference to crime. So we hear these things like leaks, accidents, scandals, disasters, spills, and mis-selling. We hear things mislabeling. We almost never hear the word crime. When we think about criminals, we tend to think a very cliché person. We might think of a person wearing a black hoodie, carrying a bag of things he has stolen, or we might even think of a group of teenagers on drugs breaking into a parked car. What you probably don't immediately think about is a very well-educated person in a business suit sitting in an expensive office tapping away at a computer. Not only corporate and state crime can cause social harm in staggering proportions, but it can even cause the death of thousands of people. This type of behavior is a perfect example of how crimes of the powerful and crimes of the powerless can be treated completely differently in society. Crime is treated in society based on class. Now, is mental health treated in society based on class as well? Let's take a look. How people act depending on where they are in society isn't just about crime. Mental health problems are related to how a person is raised, or rather, what class they're in. But this isn't a new idea. Way back in 1939, there was a study done by two sociologists, Faris and Dunham, for the University of Chicago. They found that in the poorest part of Chicago, there was the highest number of treated schizophrenia and substance abuse disorders. But now, here's where it gets interesting. I'm sure you might be thinking, well, they were treated, that's great. They admitted themselves. But no. What another study found in 1958 was that those in the lower class who were being treated for mental health were actually being treated based on a referral by the courts, meaning that the people didn't choose to be treated. The government sent them to be treated. These people being admitted from the poor part of Chicago were also more likely to have physical treatments done on them. And yes, back then, people used to be treated with shock therapy, lobotomy, and other banned treatments instead of psychotherapy. And you might think that this was so many years ago and it's not relevant, and that now things are different. But in a more recent study done by the Adult Psychiatry Morbidity in England in 2007, found that those with the highest household income were less likely to have common classified mental health problems. So now let's see what common mental health problems are. Let's define them. So the first that comes to mind would be anxiety disorders, depression, bipolar disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. just to name a few. But on the other end, we have the uncommon or rare mental health problems. Some of them are like multiple personality disorder, schizophrenia, or obsessive compulsive disorder, and a very wild one, Alice in Wonderland syndrome. So I guess the more money, more problems phrase is not relevant here. But why? Why are people below the poverty line having such a hard time with mental health? And there are many theories about this. The three main theories are this. One, the lower class experiences more social isolation, more loneliness and stress due to money issues. And I'm sure many of you really understand what I'm talking about here. I'm sure that many of you have felt how this constant worry about money can lead to higher stress levels, and living in constant stress, this chronic stress as we call it, can cause so many mental and physical health issues. The second theory suggests that it is not the circumstances of the lower class that lead to mental health problems, but rather that mental health problems lead to lower class circumstances. Let's unpack this for a bit. Now, what we mean here is that your mental health has an impact on how you function, how you're being stigmatized by your peers, and how many barriers you have to cross to access resources, which all play a role in shaping your socio-economic circumstances. And the third theory, which is a buzzword right now, is mislabeling. This theory explains that those in the lower class are more likely to have their actions or behaviors labeled as mental health problems. What this means is that if you belong to a lower class, then among other things, you can be a victim of societal perceptions and stereotypes, meaning that assumptions about your intelligence, your behavior, and your capabilities are inevitable because of your social class. The problem here is that these stereotypes may lead to a tendency to pathologize or even label behaviors that deviate from social norms as mental health problems, while they might be not. So out of these three theories, which one have you seen in your circle? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Going back to when we spoke about celebrities and their mental health, have you noticed that we're living in an era where it is applauded and even praised when a celebrity brings their mental health to the spotlight? But what about the lower class or even the middle class? Is it applauded when someone from those lower classes admits they have a mental health issue and needs help? Now, think about it in this way. Imagine working class men working at an oil rig in the middle of the ocean. And we can all agree that this is a tough job, right? Now, picture them at the galley kitchen in the evening as they eat their dinner. What do you think they might be talking about? Can you imagine them talking about their sensitive feelings and how being away from their family has an impact on their emotional well-being and how they need psychological support? Well, I cannot. That says a lot, right? Not only each class treating mental health differently, but as a society, we're treating classes with mental health issues differently. And I will leave you with this. According to recent estimates from Johns Hopkins, 1 in 4 US adults, so that's 25% of people, experience mental health illness each year, while research from NAMI states that 1 in 20 people live with a serious mental illness such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. That equates to 13.1 million people across all class levels. So, is social class and mental health evolving, or are we just repeating history? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I'm Dimitris, and I share tools and insights on how to design a well-lived life.